Hello, my scholars and saints. I hope that you are well. I know that many of us are maybe not having the best year, that a lot of things have happened, and it might be a disappointment because, after the years of the pandemic and just kind of getting our lives back to normal, I'm sure that a lot of us really hoped that 2024 might be a bit of a break, but I just want to extend hope and love and, encouragement to just really all of us to just, I guess, keep an attitude of curiosity and community and reaching out to people when we need it, and just making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, even if that's the only thing that we can do. So I just wanted to put that message out this video. We will be talking about the Genealogy of Morals. It is Tuesday, March 12th when I'm recording. So this is in my uni class, this is the last week of March, so I'll be reading as much Das Kapital as I can later tonight. But the week after, we are starting Nietzsche, and we'll be studying him for the rest of this semester. And we're starting out with a Genealogy of Morals. So I thought I would go over the preface today because it's just a few pages. If you don't know, Nietzsche was born in 1844 and passed away in 1900, so he was 55 years old. The Genealogy of Morals was published in 1887. I'm going to read the back cover for you. This book explores issues at the very core of human nature in 3 essays. Nietzsche dissects the concepts of good, bad, and evil, going on to examine humankind's transformation from barbarous creatures into civilized beings who can feel remorse, regret, pity, and compassion, but in the process destroy instinct and freedom. Nietzsche asks why the virtues of poverty, humility, and chastity have become so central to religion, even when they deny vitality and life itself. Daring to expose uncomfortable truths, this brilliant and provocative polemic provides startling insights into our complex psychology. And I have the Penguin Classics edition here. The first essay is called Good and Evil, Good and Bad. The second essay is called Guilt, Bad Conscience, and Related Matters. And the third essay is called What Do Aesthetic Ideals Mean? So really, I see Nietzsche looking at the history of morality and moral values, virtues, as a way to show that there's nothing really innate or supernatural or, I guess, even universal about them, that they're created and invented. And so Nietzsche asks why. Why are they invented? And he wants to ask questions to kind of wake us up and jar us a bit, to help us maybe take a more critical approach to what we might, again, be taking for granted. So he asks, for instance, how is a good person better than a bad person? Is that really, what does the good, whatever we've said is the good, does that actually equate to what we should value, which in Nietzsche's mind would be progress and well-being and vitality? He says a lot of the virtues, and I think he really kind of points a finger at maybe like the virtues of Christianity, like his version of Christianity that he sees most dominant in his world and country. He sees those as anti-life. And so he starts out this preface saying that, and I'll read through some of it, that we don't know ourselves. We haven't even really taken the time or the concern or interest to examine just some of the most important motivations and, I guess, limitations, like what limits us, what motivates us, what do we fear, what do we desire. Like we haven't really, he says, most people don't really take a magnifying glass to those things. And if we don't, then we have less control over our lives. If we just sort of submit to what the loudest voices in our culture says, such as do X for the common good, or if you are X, Y, and Z, then you're a bad person. And he says that, I think that to be an authentic person, you have to be not susceptible to being controlled or manipulated. And basically, I think Nietzsche would agree with that. He's kind of echoing Kant in a sense. Like everyone just finds it very comfortable to go along and submit and maybe even people please. But you have to have courage to think for yourself and to not necessarily depend on the quote-unquote authorities that are out there that are morally policing everyone. So he really wants to upend the status quo, I would say. And I would really like to go through Thus Spake Zarathustra. That's not a book that we'll be looking at this semester, but I think it's such a great book, actually. I say that, but at one point I gave up reading it because I was kind of frustrated with the energy of it. But I think after I finished it, I gained a greater, I guess, like appreciation for it. So I'm going to start off with reading most of this first page because I think it's really great. This preface is actually divided up into 8 paragraphs. We are unknown to ourselves, we men of science, and for good reason. Since we have never searched for ourselves, how should we ever find ourselves? Truly it has been said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Our treasure consists in the hives of our knowledge. And I'm going to skip some lines. As far as the rest of life with its so-called experiences is concerned, which of us has sufficient interest or sufficient time to devote to them? I think it's interesting that interest and also time is mentioned. What does Nietzsche think we're doing with our time? Is this like a Marxist critique on, work? Or I'm really interested in if he continues to talk about time. In our dealings with such affairs, we were, I fear, never entirely committed. Our heart is simply not there, and certainly not our attention. Rather, we are like someone whose divine distractions and reveries are shattered when the clock strikes 12. Suddenly awakened, the chime still resounding in his ears, he asks himself, what hour now has just struck? Sometimes we too afterwards rub our ears, as it were, and in complete astonishment and embarrassment ask, what is it that we have just experienced? Further, who are we, really? And count, after they have struck, all the 12 strokes of the clock of our experience, of our life, of our being, and alas, lose count. So, I don't know, is he talking about, maybe, so when the clock strikes 12, suddenly awakened, is that like at the end of our lives, maybe when we're forced to perhaps reflect, we're forced to be still and be quiet a bit and reflect on our lives? Do we suddenly start doubting and questioning how we've been guided in terms of maybe what we thought we should do or what risks we didn't take. It seems to me that's maybe what he is saying. We must remain foreign and unknown to ourselves. We do not understand ourselves. We are bound to be mistaken about our nature. For us, the motto, each one is the furthest away from himself, holds good to all eternity. As far as ourselves are concerned, we are unknown. And it seems to me as if he is setting up this issue, this problem, this sort of I don't know, almost attack, although that's maybe not the exact word I'm looking for. That's a little too intense, on people who are mostly slumbering, kind of in a Heideggerian way. Heidegger opens up his lectures on what is called thinking. He says that in 2,000 years, we haven't thought. I don't know if he feels like, I forget with that book, if we've never thought or we just haven't thought since Plato. But he says that most people don't even know what it is to think, which is a bold statement, right? Because most of us probably assume that all we do is think. So Heidegger's saying we don't, but he's saying that there's an art to thinking. And then that's what Nietzsche is really saying. He's saying there's an art to interpretation. There's an art to questioning our lives. And I don't know how I feel about when philosophers kind of set up the few rare people who do critically think or do think this way versus the masses. I don't know if I really love that kind of, I don't know, rhetoric of superiority and exclusivity. But, that's just, that's Nietzsche, and that's Ayn Rand, and that's Heidegger, and that's just so many philosophers. This rhetoric of exceptionality, but that's really emphasized in Nietzsche. But nevertheless, he is, starting this book with a call. He says in the beginning of the second paragraph, or the second section, my opinions concerning the origins and history of our moral prejudices. And I know it's not a complete sentence, but I just want to point out so that's what he's looking at. He's looking at the origin and the history of moral prejudices, of morality. He's looking at the value of values, the true origin of our good and our evil. He says that, he talks a little bit about his writing in this book, so I'm going to skip that. But he says that he has an instinctive skepticism about morality and everything that has been extolled as such. He says, when he started thinking about the origin of good and the origin of evil, he quite properly gave the honor to God and made him the father of evil. And he says that new immoral, or at least amoral, sort of stance kind of led him to where he is today. So I think that that phrase right there is important, that Nietzsche is not in support of immorality, but he is in support perhaps of amorality. So going beyond, as one of his books is titled, Beyond Good and Evil. He says that he soon had learned to distinguish between theological, and this is in the third section, from moral prejudice, and he gave up the search for a supernatural origin of evil. He said that, he was interested in psychological questions, so he's just trying to lay the groundwork of how this book came to be, or how his sort of thesis came to be. And these are the questions. Under what conditions did man invent for himself those judgments of value, good and evil? And I think that sort of emphasis on that kind of action, the invention, it's kind of the same thing. Like, instead of asking why, we read certain spiritual texts, let's say, like in the Christian tradition, why is God like this? Why is God sometimes vengeful? Or why is God sometimes violent? Why is God sometimes punishing? Nietzsche wants to ask, well, why did you make a God that was punishing and violent and demanding? Like, why did you? So he kind of switches the perspective and, I guess, the responsibility. And what intrinsic value do they possess in themselves? So instead of just like non-thinkingly accepting that it's valuable to say something is good, and it's valuable to judge something as evil, is that really helpful or valuable or necessary? Nietzsche just wants to deconstruct all of our assumptions and ways of being and thinking and put them, again, under a magnifying glass. Have they up to the present advanced human welfare, or rather have they harmed our race? Are they a symptom of distress, impoverishment, and degeneration of life? Or conversely, do they find in them an expression of the abundant vitality and vigor of life, its courage, its self-confidence, its future? So we can see right from the beginning what Nietzsche values. He values the advancement and progress of human welfare. He values vitality, vigor of life, courage, self-confidence. So he values, I guess, strength and courage and power. The book that we will be reading in class besides this in the Gay Science is titled The Will to Power. So we can see that Nietzsche does, in a sense, have morals or ethics, or if we can't say that because we want to kind of keep the amorality, standards or goals. So I'm going to skip to, I guess, the only thing that I thought in the fourth section, let's see, just some phrases. He reiterates that he's focusing on the origin of morality. He wants to understand it, because if we can understand the origin of it, maybe we can, I guess, exact from it some of its power. He's talking about maybe another one of his books. Well, he is talking about another one of his books, Human All Too Human, where he looked at the early history of good and evil, namely their origin from the castes of the aristocrats and the slaves. He also looked at moral asceticism, the morality of custom, a far older and more original kind of morality. He looked at, in his past writings, altruistic ethics. And he's talking also about a critique of a specific book, Dr. Paul Rée, The Origin of Moral Sentiments. He says about that book, I believe that I have never read anything in which every single proposition and conclusion has elicited so emphatic a denial on my part as did that book. So, talking a bit about that. And then going on to section 5, I thought there was a really interesting quote. He looks at these sort of dangerous or anti-life tendencies. He says, it concerns in particular the value of the altruistic instincts. So he doesn't like that. The instincts of pity, self-denial, and self-sacrifice. And he mentions that Schopenhauer had persistently at one time painted these virtues in golden hues, but later on he uttered both to life and to himself his own no. And he says about these instincts, these altruistic instincts or virtues of pity, self-denial, and self-sacrifice, Nietzsche had a growing mistrust and a skepticism because he began to see the great danger to mankind, the beginning of the end, the will turning against life, and the final stages of disease. And I think that this is one of the quotes that Ayn Rand might like, because she talks about the virtue of selfishness and how damaging self-denial and self-sacrifice means. Because in her books, she says that sacrifice is the choosing of a lesser value. You're choosing the lesser value in place of a higher value, and that's why it's a sacrifice. So therefore, sacrifice is always irrational, because why should you ever choose something that is of a lesser value? He talks about how this tendency or this grouping of virtues might be seen as a new Buddhism, or even a certain kind of nihilism. So if you've watched some of my other videos, especially my video on Is Nietzsche a Nihilist, he is, in a very specific way. So there's also a kind of more passive and pessimistic and hopeless and eternal nihilism that he critiques and finds is, also anti-life. In section 6, he is starting to talk about, the art that the art of questioning. He says that, we have to learn to ask questions, and we need a critique of moral values. He says the value of these values is for the first time to be called into question. And I can't help think about Heidegger's work on the etymology of calling something. What is called thinking? What is named as thinking? What is invoked or resurrected even as thinking? He says we need to investigate morality as a result, as a symptom, as a mask, as tartuffery, as disease, as a misunderstanding, but also morality as a cause, as a remedy, as a stimulant, as a hindrance, as a poison. He says the value of these values was taken for granted as a simple fact and as indisputable. No one has up to the present expressed the slightest doubt or hesitation in judging the good man to be of a higher value than the evil man, of a higher value with regard specifically to human progress, welfare, and prosperity in general. So you can see that these are what are truly valuable in Nietzsche's mind. What if we suppose the reverse were the truth? Suppose there lurked in the good man a regressive trait, likewise a danger, a lure, a poison, a narcotic, by means of which the present lived at the expense of the future, maybe in greater comfort and less danger to some people, but also as pettier. So what was I going to say? In another work, he sort of does this same thing about honesty. He asks, why is it better to be honest than to lie? What if lying is the ultimate truth? And I think he does this not necessarily because that's the conclusion, that's what he wants to say, that's his thesis. I think he just wants to create some distance and, again, kind of be a little jarring. Maybe we don't agree with that. We don't agree with just the opposite of everything and the inverse of every moral and value that's in our culture today. But we do question and we modify it. It's just kind of like, questioning and critiquing the economic system instead of just taking it for granted. It is what it is. It's the best that can happen. And we're just going to go along with it and try to tweak it. But maybe, if we can start from the fact that this isn't the best of all possible worlds, well, then maybe we can find what does make more sense. So I think his intention is really noble and helpful. He says, let's go to the penultimate section, number 7. He says, the work involves exploring the immense, distant, and hidden realm of morality, a morality which has actually existed and has actually been practiced. He later talks about the real history of morality. And this kind of reminds me of Marx, because Marx, as a materialist, has beef with the idealist, the German idealist, with speculative philosophy, which focuses on a concept, a notion, an idea, the theoretical, the abstract, instead of looking at real people. They look at the concept of man, he says, but not an actual man that's working 12 hours a day and, factory conditions and dying at 37 because he's just been burnt out. So, Nietzsche wants to look at, the morality that has existed and practiced, because then I think there's more of a space for critique, because we can articulate something theoretically in a really lovely way, but when it actually is manifest, does it stay as perfect? And if it doesn't, well, isn't that more important than, focusing on the ideal or the idea with a capital I? He says that the color gray is important for a genealogist of morals instead of, he says, blue, which I don't know what blue would represent, but to me, gray would represent ambiguity. He kind of talks about, I guess, the difference between a morality or an ethics that is for life instead of anti-life, that is strong instead of weak. He mentions a demure moral weakling, a dilettante that's all too modern, who is tamed, who is indolent with a touch of pessimism and exhaustion, in contrast to his movement and where he wants to go, which is the kind of questioning he's doing that can create enjoyment. He mentions the gay science and a reward that is for protracted, brave, laborious, and profound earnestness, a trait, again, that few possess. So he says that our old morality is fit material for comedy, and we shall have discovered a new plot and a new possibility for the Dionysian drama, entitled The Soul's Fate. And he will soon make good use of it, one can safely wager, he, the great ancient eternal author of the comedy of our existence. So he wants to make sure that he doesn't despair and that we don't despair over what we find, but we laugh at it. And by laughing at it, again, taking away some of its power. Because if you can laugh at something, and it's not so serious, then I think that is empowering. That can be empowering sometimes. So the last section, he mentions his Zarathustra, and he says about that book, which I think is just interesting reflection on that book. I cannot acknowledge that anyone really knows that book well unless he has been either deeply wounded by it or deeply delighted by it. And then he talks about the form of an aphorism. He says, an aphorism, if properly coined and cast into its final form, is far from being deciphered as soon as it has been read. On the contrary, it is only after this prelude that interpretation, properly speaking, begins. And of course, for that purpose, an art of interpretation is necessary. So he doesn't mind and he doesn't want that what he says will be immediately understandable. He's using the aphorism because he also wants maybe his readers to think and to do the work. He doesn't want you to just, be spoon-fed by him. He doesn't want you to be spoon-fed by anyone. It kind of reminds me of like the Buddhist idea that, if you don't need the raft anymore, if it doesn't help you, if you are on land, set the raft down, even if the raft is Buddhism, So I think maybe doing this genealogy, this genealogical investigation is what he wants, like, I don't know, can I say the Ubermensch to do? with the new species of human. He says that there is certainly something which is essential in order to practice reading as an art, something which has nowadays been forgotten. That is why it will take quite some time for my writings to become readable. I think there's like a little bit of hope in that. It's like people will like them in the future. And because he always seems, I think did he write the Genealogy of Morals as one of his books? I remember he actually wrote because he was so unhappy of the reception of his other books. I think this might be it, as he does talk a lot about his other works in this preface. And for this, it is necessary to become almost a cow, and under no circumstances a modern man. Rumination. So that's just funny. That's great. That's like Marx's quote about roots and being radical. Just like, good play on words. So I hope that was helpful in giving you a taste of the Genealogy of Morals. So we're reading some of it. We never read the entire book in class. So I'm excited to talk about that. I think that our professor gave us such a short assignment because we have our second essay due next week. So, all right, everyone, thank you so much for spending time with me this week. Again, I just send you all the love and the care and the abundance and healing that you need for whatever you're going through, and I'll catch you next week.